You took everything from me.
I don't even know who you are.
You will.
The Cinik Radio podcast.
Hi, I'm Chad L. Coleman, Tyrese from The Walking Dead, and Cuddy from The Wire, and you are listening to the Cinik Radio podcast. Here your host, Cinik.
Hey, the facts are Spider-Man belongs in the MCU. Sony was delusional thinking they didn't need Marvel, and now he's back. And we, the fans, are 100% proudly responsible for that.
Igrihe.
As long as DC wants to make dark and gritty movies, they're going to lag behind Marvel in every category.
And Ryan.
Batman vs. Superman is objectively better than Infinity War.
IG, did we just forget Kim?
You guys completely suck.
This is the greatest show of all time.
This is episode 147 of the Cinik Radio podcast, and I'm your host, Cinik, and joining me, as always, two people who are ready to rip open the multiverse like a bag of chips, Igrihe and Ryan. And on this week's show, we're going to take a look at Disney Plus's first of many Marvel shows coming down the pipe, WandaVision, episode 1 and 2. The setting of the show so far seems kind of like a cross between Bewitched and Leave It to Beaver meets Avengers. I don't know. But couldn't the world's most unlikely couple find love in a 50s styles TV land after the tragic events of Endgame? Let's find out. Ig, being the elder statesman of the show and growing up in the 50s, does this show kind of remind you of the stuff that you watched as a kid on your black and white TV?
You know, you might think that's kind of a joke. I'm not that old, but I did have a black and white TV, and I did used to watch a lot of these old programs, and sometimes still do. And this episode is kind of, at least kicks off a lot like the Dick Van Dyke Show, which is kind of fun. Like, I used to watch it almost religiously every night. It would turn on Nick at Night would come on, and I would watch Dick Van Dyke and I Love Lucy and things like that. So it wasn't too bad watching this. I mean, they even, when they like got the Marvel Studios logo at the end, they kind of shrunk into old TV size and changed the audio so it sounded like it was coming out of an old TV. And then they had this WandaVision theme song that they were doing at the beginning of the first episode that was really interesting. Like, I actually rewound it and listened to it again because they were saying all kinds of weird stuff in the middle of it. But it was kind of interesting how well they were able to put that together.
Yeah, there's a lot of small things that you don't really see in the show unless you're paying attention. Sort of like how they were in the second episode, they were playing Help Me Rhonda, but it kind of morphed into Help Me Wanda. I like that. I mean, I like the level of detail that Marvel does put into their stuff. Ryan, what do you think we're really looking at here? Is this Wanda alternate reality or to cope with the loss of Vision, or is this something more sinister being done to her against her will?
That's a good question. I think it's more likely kind of like a fever dream or her creating this alternate reality as more of a coping mechanism, you know, just based on the little kind of the voices that we hear saying, you know, Wanda, you know, kind of seemingly calling her and seeming to be concerned with how she's feeling. But I mean, we're not given that much information, but, you know, I tend to think she's creating this world due to past trauma, but you know, who knows? I think one of the interesting things about this is that it really can go anywhere, and there could be any number of reasons why this is happening, and more importantly, like what results from it.
Yeah, I kind of think that maybe she's being controlled in some way, and she's trying to find herself out, or trying to find herself like some sort of reality in all of this. I think she's trying to figure out what's going on exactly. There was a part of me in the very beginning that thought maybe she was just coping and, you know, dealing with the loss of Vision. But then I think that we're going to find out there's something deeper at play. IG, these breadcrumb type shows leave the audiences guessing. I mean, some of them were pretty big hits like Lost and Westworld. But after a spell of Marvel shows and movies, we haven't gotten anything since Endgame, really. Do you think this was the right idea to run with for their first show on Disney Plus?
I don't think it's necessarily a bad idea. I think the misstep is not putting out other stuff that they had ready to hype up the audience, right? And we know that Black Widow's been ready for a long time. And I think if they would have released that first, if they would have put that out and gotten everybody kind of salivating for more Marvel stuff, that this might have hit a little better. But I think the problem really is that they have to set so much stuff up and kind of get things in something that we're used to watching. And they're doing this so far off to the left of where we've been that it's difficult to kind of own in on it. So that's where I think the misstep was. I think they really should have released Black Widow or something else, like a cinematic type thing, to get us amped up. And I think that would have gotten us a little more excited, because this just kind of dropped. Like, I didn't even expect until they announced it just a couple of weeks ago that WandaVision was even going to be first. I thought it would be Falcon and Winter Soldier first. Just, it's one of those things where they're more beloved characters and more story behind them. Like, Wanda's been around some and Vision has been around some, but there's really just not a whole lot going on with them.
Well, I always worry this with the movies, too. When they announced Ant-Man, I'm like, all right, is this too deep of a cut for people? I know visually it'll be fun, but nobody knows really who Ant-Man is unless you're a diehard comic fan. So when you get to WandaVision, sure, they've been in the Avengers, but will they hold enough interest of the fans? Now, I would love to blame this show being first on COVID and say, all right, this was the easy way to go because this is a small-time show. There's not a lot of effects. There's not a lot of CGI involved. So this would be the easy part to push out, but this has been on the schedule all along. So my problem with it is Endgame is really, really far away at this point. We're all kind of just chomping at the bit for more superhero action, and then here comes along more of a think piece type show. I don't know if the timing of it is right. I know they had to put it out because it's supposed to be kind of wrapped up in a lot of the things to come, but I'm not quite sure that this was the show to start off Disney Plus. I mean, if you look at Star Wars, we got The Mandalorian, which was amazing. Now, we haven't seen the whole picture of this yet, so it's going to be hard for us to judge whether this is going to be a Mandalorian type show and a like game changer. But so far after 2 episodes, I'm not quite convinced. Ryan, episode 1 sets the tone and hits all the 50 tropes of the stay-at-home mom and pearls and making dinner and the boss coming home and trying to impress him. As the episode switches from 1 to 2, the camera angles kind of change and the set gets bigger, and we even start seeing like signs of color. Do you think this is kind of a sign of things to come, that each episode will kind of evolve a little bit more and maybe we go to another time period at another?
Yeah, it seems to be that like we're going to shift each episode through the decades, at least from what I've read. And that for the most part seemed to be what it felt like, you know, where we got more of a 50s vibe in the first episode, we get a little bit more of a 60s vibe in the second. And obviously at the end of the second, we see that it shifts to color, but you know, that kind of rich, like, you know, 70s TV color. So, you know, I think that's the way it's going to go. You know, it remains to be seen, I guess, how well that works. You know, maybe we'll get into a little bit more as we get it, you know, talk, but, you know, as far as my own complaints about the show, but if it seems very much committed to sticking with this kind of format of like taking a different era of sitcom and seeing it through. And I think where it does well is when it does give us those hints of the MCU, and when it does shift away a little bit and give us a little piece of color or a little brings in the drama. But yeah, I guess that's where they're going with it. And, you know, for better or worse, they're going to go for it. I do agree with you guys that it would have been better served to have another show or have Black Widow or something, because we've had such a dearth of MCU content. To have this thrown at us as our first Marvel, you know, content in almost a year, it's weird. And it would have been nice to have something else to set this up. And I'm sure that part of this is also just that I think that by the end of this will set up a lot of like whatever phase we're on, phase 4, I think it is. But yeah, it's a weird format to stick with and to commit to as your first show, you know, on Disney Plus.
Yeah, note to Marvel, we really need that Black Widow movie. I mean, stop holding on. It's not going to make nearly what you think it's going to make, even when theaters start back up. Just release it. If you want to charge us extra for it, other than the Disney Plus fee, we'll pay it. The fans are going to pay it because they want anything at this point. And I think it's a misstep on their part, especially now with Netflix. They're going to release a movie a month. HBO Max is going to release a movie a month. I think Disney is kind of missing the boat by not taking advantage of this. I know Mulan made good money, but not theater money. But when really, when is the theater money going to come back? So just release Black Widow. We'll pay $20, $30 for it.
So the other thing I saw with everything going on there, you were talking about the episodes and kind of doing things. So the first episode only had one pop of color, just one tiny little pop of color. And if you blink, you almost missed it. And it was the toaster. Pushed the toaster down and a little red light started to blink. That was the only color we had in the first episode. The rest of it was black and white. Funny enough, it made the Iron Man repulsor sound when he pushed it down. It like powered up, went.
Well, it was a Stark toaster.
It was a Stark toaster too, so that was great. Now we started getting more color in this one, okay, but like the first one started out like Dick Van Dyke. This one started out like Bewitched, and they turned to color at the end of the episode. Interestingly enough, Bewitched, when it started, was in black and white, and further into its run, it turned to color. So I think they're kind of moving through eras and moving into different shows. So it was just kind of a neat thing I caught on there. I don't think it really has much to do with anything, what show they're tying it to. I think they're just like trying to hit some nostalgia points that some people might jump on with.
But if you notice, all the colors so far have been red and yellow, and I'm sure it'll move to green in a further episode, which is the two characters' colors in the Marvel Universe. Following up on what I asked Ryan, IG, do you think that Wanda is in this reality alone, or somehow Vision's there with her and he's also alive and trapped inside it? And do you think that he'll be the catalyst of figuring this all out, since his thinking is really analytical?
Well, I think Vision may not be there, but there may be some remnants of Vision, because we all know he was born out of Jarvis from Stark Technology. So I wouldn't think that Jarvis would just be gone because he went into Vision, because, you know, people have backups of computer programs. So there may be something there that way, but I think that while Ryan thinks she may be creating it herself, I think that there's something else creating this. I think it's a more nefarious thing, and that's where we're going to get quote unquote bad guys from. There's going to be some that are involved with putting her in there, and some in there creating the world. What's the neighbor's name that keeps sticking her head in everything?
Is it Agnes?
Agnes, yeah. I think Agnes is going to turn into be something way more important than she seems so far.
IG, being a big comic fan, what can you tell us about the sword emblem that we saw not only on the helicopter, but the computer screens watching Wanda? And do you think that they'll draw any kind of content from the House of M storylines from the comics?
Well, the sword is supposed to be like an offshoot of S.H.I.E.L.D., and we all know that S.H.I.E.L.D. was kind of secretly run by Hydra. So I think there may be some remnants of that coming along. So I think that's going to be part of where I think it's going with the more nefarious things. And then House of M is really interesting, because that basically starts with Wanda really showing how powerful she really is. Because at one point she just says, no more mutants. And they're gone. They're all gone. The X-Men are no more. And like, she changes the entire outlook of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, or the Marvel Universe at the time. It wasn't cinematic, the Marvel Universe. And, you know, some things start to pop up afterwards, and some mutants start coming back, but all the mutants that were there at the time when she says no more mutants leave. They're dead. They're gone. They're no more. So I think that we might get some things like that, but it might also be in whatever state she's induced right now, so that she believes it happens, but maybe it doesn't really happen. But it also says that maybe this is the show where we start getting X-Men showing up in it, if they start leaning toward House of M.
It's interesting that you say that, because that's going into my next question. But yeah, it's my understanding that S.H.I.E.L.D. was more of an earthbound organization, where SWORD is about the cosmos and outside alien forces, that they monitor that. I'm not quite sure where they're going with it, but I'm going to read more about it as the time goes on, and hopefully they'll explain more, because you have people out there that absolutely refuse to read. They're going to be left in the dust if they don't go and watch these YouTube clips, or, you know, read articles about what they're watching. Ryan, so far the supporting cast has been led with favorites like Catherine Hahn from Parks and Rec and the movie Bad Moms, and also the voice of Doc Ock Doc in the Spider-Verse movie, and Deborah Jo Rupp from that 70s show. How do you feel that like the castings go on, especially with the smaller parts? And do you think we will see any of the other Avengers?
The casting's been really good so far. I will say that. Like, I don't have any issues with anybody that's been part of the supporting cast. I think that for what it's worth, Elizabeth Olsen and Paul Bettany have done a great job, in their characters, and even, just even playing the comedy. Like, they both seem to have the right kind of comedy timing. And so, I think all across the board, I think the performances have been pretty good. Granted, like, it's primarily focused on them, but yeah, the supporting cast has been good. From what I understand, there seems to be a lot of rumors and theories going on about who, what alter egos may, these other, the supporting cast may be. And so I'm sure there's a lot there that if you're, kind of a deep Marvel fan, there's a lot there for you as well. But yeah, no, definitely don't have a problem with any of the performances so far. Much like, kind of similar to The Mandalorian, where we would get a lot of these like little actors who maybe have a cult following or have a bigger role in like a smaller show that do a really good job in small bits. And I think this has similar, and so I'm hopeful that as we get kind of little cameos that they all seem they all do a good job.
I've really liked the casting so far. I think it's been fun. The neighborhood that they're building is interesting, and I really think that a lot of thought gets put into these decisions. Like, some of these shows, they just throw people, all right, they look the part, but Marvel and Star Wars so far in the two shows that they've showed us, looks like there's been a lot of thought into the type of actor or actress that they wanted in those parts. And Kathryn Hahn she's funny and engaging and playing kind of the nosy neighbor. And she might be even a deeper cut, like Ryan said, in the Marvel universe. She really is the perfect choice because she kind of borders on obnoxious sometimes, but she can also play it low key and funny. We've got some Randall Park and Kat Dennings coming, in future episodes. So I have liked that so far. IG, compared to me, you're a black belt in domestic activities. Like, I'm just learning, but you're there. You make stuff that is simply amazing. You know how to do things that I don't. What super ability do you think would be more to your advantage if you were just going to be, say, a stay-at-home dad?
Oh, the mind controller telepathy and stuff to like clean up the mess. Man, if I could have that would be the most amazing thing. And especially when you have children in the house, because they have an innate ability to make a mess out of literally anything. It's crazy. Like, I'll clean something and it'll be perfect, and I'll walk away from it and come back an hour later and like it's destroyed. And I'm like, I asked my family, what happened? What are you talking about? I'm like, look at this room. It's destroyed. Oh, that's just a couple of things out of place. I'm like, but I just cleaned it. And maybe mind control might be better, so that I could, once I clean the stuff, I could just mind control them to stay in their own rooms and not mess up the rest of the house.
I'm thinking along the lines of super speed. What wouldn't super speed make easier? You can't make things cook faster with super speed, but everything else, as far as the cleaning aspect of it, I think that's the route I would go. And no, this question wasn't at all meant for Kim. In some ways, storytelling as far as TV and movies really have advanced. It's become interesting and complex, but in a lot of ways, and on a lot of shows and movies, it's become simplified and repetitive. Shows like 911 and CSI Phone Booth or CSI Pittsburgh or however many CSIs they want to run out there kind of wrap up in an hour. They're pretty simplistic and they're paint by numbers. Storytelling like this is good for the people that want to look at their phones and not pay attention to the show really. And then next week, they don't have to remember what happened. But this show is a little more like Lost in Westworld, like I said earlier. Do you think it's a little too complex when it's geared for somebody that's basically interested in the superhero genre?
I don't necessarily think so. I think the problem right now is I have no idea what the show is or is trying to be, so because on one hand it's like, okay, cool, you want to be kind of experimental, and this is a really cool idea. Okay, we're gonna take a different era of sitcoms, and each episode's gonna kind of do that, but we're gonna have undertones of the Marvel and MCU involved, and this is all going to lead to something big, which I think it will. I think the issue now is I don't know what it is, because it seems on the face of it like it's going to be kind of just episodic, kind of mindless, like old comedy, right? Like those old shows, as funny and good as they were, you didn't have to, you can miss 3 episodes and you're fine. It's not like serialized storytelling. And so in this case, it's not quite serialized, but we all know that it's going to be. We all know that you're going to have to pay attention to everything, and that there are going to be a little detail that happened last week. We're going to need to go, we'll find out about that in episode 8. But the issue I think right now is that, maybe it's that I'm not confident in what the show is telling me it's going to be. I think that's where I'm a little bit, I just don't know, because it could be just like a, CSI or whatever, because it's like, all right, we're just going to do some comedy every week and that's it. Or maybe it morphs by episode 3 or 4 into like, our standard kind of show. I just have no idea. And so it's a little weird and unsettling, I guess. Maybe they're going for that.
IG, it's definitely a different take on the superhero experience, especially for what we've been used to from Marvel. What are your thoughts on where it's headed, and your rating on the 2 episodes, and your final thoughts?
Well, I interestingly enough, I kind of like what I saw. They didn't over exaggerate the fact that they were super powerful, but they didn't downplay it too much either, right? They were trying to hide it from the people that are around, but they were still using their powers, which was interesting. I think that they're laying some groundwork that I think that by episode 4, we're really going to get some movement. Like, I think they're trying to do too much right now rather than like tell a little story and then let's get moving. So it's starting a little slow, but I think it'll pay off. I have faith in the creators over at Disney and the people like Kevin Feige and stuff that I know still has his hand in this cookie jar, that this is going to come out and it's going to be just fine, because even his bad stuff is still pretty good. So I'm excited. As far as the 2 episodes go, the second one I think was better than the first one. And maybe it's because, we're really starting to move. Like the end of the first one, I got excited when I saw that dude turning knobs and dials and stuff with the sword badge on the desk and everything. The second one with the little color splashes and her saying no to the beekeeper at the end, and then things rewound and like went a different direction. I thought that was really cool. And, I don't know where Wanda got time stone abilities from, but if that's gonna bring back Infinity Stones and some of that stuff going on, that could be really interesting. I think there's a lot of possibilities for it to go. I'm gonna keep my faith up, say I believe in Kevin Feige, and say that these are gonna be fine. I think the first episode I'd give maybe a 7, and the second one probably a 7.5, 7.5.
I'm mixed on it, because I think like conceptually it's an interesting idea. As I said, as we talked about, like kind of taking the sitcom format, mixing that in with Marvel, and there are spots that I really like. Like I think I love the performances. I like that kind of the whole magic skit. It was really kind of funny, and him really doing things that are legitimately magic, and her trying to make it look like it's quote fake magic. So I kind of I like that. I think the issue for me is, through the first 2 episodes, they feel like an SNL skit that's gone on way too long. And that's saying something, because most SNL skits go on way too long. It's like, it felt, both episodes feel like an SNL skit, because it's like they're committed to the sitcom idea, but it's so committed that it's not quite like parody or a spoof, but it's not funny enough. Like it's humorous, but it's not quite funny enough. But I don't know if that's what they're going for. Are they going for it being a little unsettling and not really funny, and having the laugh track, which is terrible. But so I just don't get it, because like I said, to me it just feels like an SNL skit that's just gone on too long, and I don't know where it's going. And so I hope that by the next episode it starts giving us an idea of where it is, because I don't know that I'm going to really like 10 episodes of just like mediocre comedy without at least starting to shift and give us something that makes it feel like it there's meaning behind it and there's something to watch. So far, like I would give each, I'd say, I agree with Ig. I think episode 2 is a little bit better than episode 1. So I'd say episode 1 is a 6 and episode 2 is like a 6.5 for me. So, it has potential, but I need them to give me something to make me excited about it, because I'm just not quite there yet.
I really agree with you guys across the board. Okay, as much as I enjoyed it and I thought it was fun, absolutely there was no accident that they released the two of them together, because if they would have released the first one, I don't know if people would have came back the second week for the second episode. So that wasn't an accident. I mean, the show will grow stale if we don't move forward and we don't dive into the mystery deeper and deeper and deeper every week. Like, they need to show us a little bit more and more and not leave us hanging as we go along, or it's going to be a hard sell. The sitcom angle of it isn't enough, no matter how far we progress or no matter how many cute sets they throw at us. It's got to move forward. It's a new concept. I'm willing to stick with it. I didn't like the first episode at all. I would probably give it a 5. The second episode, probably more around a 7, because I did like the comedy stuff, even though I'm not believing that a multi-billion-dollar machine like Vision is going to be jammed up with a piece of gum, and that's going to screw things up. But the humor did land. I did like the fact that the beekeeper at the end, and they pushed a little more color. I'm just worried that the fickle instant gratification set, that they may not stick around, and that might cause it not to have future seasons. Paul Bettany and Elizabeth Olsen are two of my favorite actors in the MCU, so I was excited to kind of see them get their own show, even though I don't love their characters as much as I do some of the others. I'll stick around and I'll see where it's headed. And I know that the repercussions of the show are supposed to carry over into Doctor Strange and Spider-Man and open the door for the X-Men. The ratings aren't high, but I think that, and I don't know if I'd rewatch these episodes unless I absolutely had to, but I'm definitely going to check it out going forward.
And that's it. You made it to the end of another episode of the Cinik Radio podcast. I'm Igrihe, here with Cinik, who you can find at CINIKRADIO.com. Also, we had Ryan, who you can find at thejimwits.com. We'll be back next week with some new stuff for you. Send your crazy news stories, any comments, questions, and concerns to us at CINIKRadio@gmail.com. Find us on the internet at CINIKRadio.com. Look for us on Facebook at Facebook.com/CINIKRadio. Find us on Twitter at CINIKRadio. And find us on Instagram at CINIKRadio. You can also head over to tpublic.com, search for Cinik, CINIK, and get your own Cinik Radio podcast gear. T-shirts, mugs, cups, stickers, all the cool Cinik Radio podcast stuff you could possibly want. It'd help the show, and we would greatly appreciate it. Thanks again for all the love and support. Keep listening, sharing it with your friends, like, listen, and subscribe. And until next time, don't get captured.
Follow the podcast on Twitter, Facebook, and at CINIKRadio.com. Available for download on iTunes.
You know, I don't need them to show up and do a tight 5 minutes on airline food, so...